Hi, everyone. Welcome to the 2020 Community Stories Film Festival Virtual Edition. My name is Laura Waters Hinson, and I am a professor of film at American University. And this is the Q&A for the Community Voice Lab block of short films. We will be taking audience questions during the second half of our conversation, so please feel free to submit any questions for our panelists in the comments box. We would really welcome those. So to tell you a little bit more about this block of films, all of these films came out of a project at American University called the Community Voice Lab. And the lab focuses on telling the stories of community storytellers in the Washington, D.C. area. And the ethos of the lab is collaboration with the goal of creating participatory media that is less extractive and more collaborative, more cooperative. Our goal is to emphasize the voices and the unique perspectives of the participants about whom we make these films. So the filmmakers in this block have gone through a course that I teach called Community Documentary. And the idea is to partner with the community storyteller to collaborate with them to tell their story. So I'm excited. All of you have seen the films. You're going to get to meet the filmmakers today. And so I want to start with our first filmmaker. Are we going to bring on Fernando? All right, Fernando. Wonderful. Hi, Fernando. How are you doing?
Good. How about you?
I'm doing great. Fernando is one of our students from last year, and his film was Dancing Alone. And so I just want to ask you first if you could tell us a little bit about the film, about your idea, how you got the idea for the film, how you met your storyteller, and really just what was your passion for telling this story and working with this storyteller.
Yes, so the film is about Yanet Juarez, who is a Mexican folkloric dancer. She's part of the Maru Montero Dance Company, which is the oldest Mexican folk dance group in the DMV area. When she started it, there was nothing like it here except some mariachi groups here and there. And so the film was conceived before the coronavirus pandemic, but as it was created and the virus became something that inhibited Yanet from dancing, that became a theme that we wanted to explore. So that's why the film has both virtual footage and an in-person footage that was captured before the onset of this. But I met Yanet because I myself participated in Mexican folkloric dance in the area. And I knew Yanet for a while, but I never really explored Yanet's story, if that makes sense. And so using the collaborative approach, I really wanted to challenge myself to say, okay, you don't know everything, even though you know Yanet, this isn't your story, this is Yanet's story. So, to work with Yanet to bring it to the screen.
And what was like the biggest challenge of when the pandemic hit? What, in terms of just the filmmaking aspect of it, how did you overcome those challenges?
So actually, everything was originally to be filmed in the later months of the semester, which is when the virus happened. The reason I filmed earlier was because there were some performances that were going to happen, and this was like I wasn't sure that there were going to be performances later, so this was footage that I didn't know about the virus, but it was a coincidence that I was able to film some of it beforehand. But I really wanted to spend a lot more time in person with Yanet, with the camera, without the camera. A big part of Yanet's journey with dance is the commute. She has to take several buses to and from dance. Dance practices are on the weekend nights. The DMV public transit itself is a little choppy, especially at night, especially on Saturdays and Fridays. And so I really wanted one of the original ideas was to include a lot of footage of that and footage on the public transit. But of course that no longer became an option. So having to adapt was trying to figure out, okay, how to work with what we have, how to still include Yanet, which is in a big way, which is why we decided on doing a virtual interview session, but still filming it. So still trying to immerse the audience in something a little more just than like a webcam.
Great. Yes. And I loved a lot of the creative devices that you used, especially the way that you interviewed her on Zoom, but you filmed your own computer and you had the shoes, the dance shoes next to it. You created a whole setup, kind of created kind of production values, even in the midst of having to do Zoom interviews, right? So I feel like you got super creative in the midst of the pandemic. What started as a limitation, I think, became kind of an asset. How did Yannette respond to the film? And did you give her opportunities during your rough cut edit did she give feedback to you during that process?
She did. When things when the virus, kind of threw things a little off track. I mean, they threw them off track for Yannette too. She, aside from the dance, the other aspect of the film is her path in medicine. And so, she was going through finals at the time, trying to get certified. So, I was trying to, bug her, of course, to get her input, but also be respectful of her time. But she did give feedback on an edit because, that was big part of the course, was making sure that that this is something that the storytellers are comfortable with and that they feel like they're being portrayed in a way that they're okay with. And so I was very careful to make sure that that was the case.
That's awesome. Well, thank you, Fernando. Let's hear from the next filmmaker, a little background. I think we're going to go to Taylor next. All right. Hi, Taylor.
Hello. How are you?
I'm doing great. It's great to see your face again. I've really missed all of my American University students. Taylor is the director of When You Are Needed. And Taylor, please tell us about how you pivoted during the course and what you thought you were going to start out making a film about in terms of community storytelling and what you ended up making a film about.
Yeah, I started originally, I was going to work with Street Sense Media, and I had a partnership, and we were going back and forth, and we're going to talk a lot about mothers who are living in DC on a low-income budget and are in complicated housing situations, and telling her story. And then we went away for spring break and just never returned, and unfortunately that couldn't happen, which is obviously really difficult to be in the planning stages and wanting to tell someone's story, and it couldn't end up working out. So I'm hopeful to work with her in the future, but it just so happened that I was quarantined with my partner, who was a volunteer EMT and was gracious enough to let me film his experience. And so it sort of just fell in my lap that he was a good new partner to be focusing on. We originally wanted to do the film on our relationship and him being an EMT, and how that was, for me, watching him be out on like the front lines and staying at home, and how we were dealing with COVID together, and like putting each other at risk, and both being limited and not being able to go home because of his job. And it quickly became clear that his story is much more compelling than mine. And he's sitting here and listening to me, but I'm glad that it worked out the way it did, because it ended up being a really nice time capsule of what he was doing. And it's obviously a much lower budget than films that I'm sure will come out about EMTs and first responders during the pandemic. But I'm glad we were able to make some sort of time capsule that, even now that it's only been a few months, it's crazy to look back on and remember emotionally where we were and where he was only a few months ago. And it's been a good thing to be able to share with our family and our friends and other people who maybe don't totally understand what those first few weeks of the pandemic were, and how important it is that we don't get back to that place.
It was a really scary time. And I remember talking with you a lot about the stakes of what you were contending with, because you're a student, and also your partner was also a full-time student, while also being a almost full-time volunteer EMT. And the idea even of a full-time college student also voluntarily putting themselves into harm's way. He was not getting paid for driving these ambulances, right?
Yeah.
And I just find that remarkable. And is he there?
He is here.
Does he want to be on camera? Does he want to tell it? No pressure.
No, yes, he can.
Sure.
Yeah, no, you were in your senior or junior
Hello.
year?
Hi.
Senior year.
Hi, how are you?
I'm great. Good to see you again.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me and supporting Taylor and her work. And it's definitely not just my story. You know, I couldn't have done any of that without her support. So we're a team.
Well, tell me about the filmmaking process for you. And I know that you were filming some on your own, which is one of the methods that we talk a lot about in the lab, is allowing our participants to film themselves and contribute their own footage toward their story. What was your experience of taking part in film?
Yeah, I mean, before all of this started, you know, Taylor had been wanting to come out and do a ride along with us, which would have been great. But obviously, kind of as soon as COVID started picking up, they limited, you know, ride-alongs. They said no, none of that, and only limited it to absolutely essential individuals. As far as the filming process, it worked out really well because, you know, my colleagues and the department were pretty supportive of it. Obviously, the biggest limitation is I couldn't show any patient interactions, of course, or anything that would be HIPAA violating information, which is actually more than just even the patient. So anything inside the hospital, you know, any patient belongings or inside a patient's home. So we really were only able to show kind of the responding to scenes and, you know, the kind of in between. But I think that still kind of portrayed a good amount of, kind of brought the sense of what things were like. You know, it was a little bit challenging to sometimes remember that I'm trying to film this. You know, I know there were days that you wish I brought back more footage. I was like, there were some cool things that happened that I could have filmed, but it just didn't cross my mind because, you know, obviously there's a lot of other things you're thinking about when you're working.
Larger things on your plate.
I guess.
Things, yeah. But I think it worked out. It worked really well. He shot everything in the ambulance, everything in the stations, all the helicopter scenes. That was all shot by you or people you were riding with on iPhones that he brought back. So I would send him with very loose ideas of, you know, I'd love a shot of following you walking through the station, and like I'd love a shot of the door opening. And not all of those shot ideas came to fruition, which was fine because you ended up capturing a lot more things that I wouldn't have thought of and ended up being innovative. I think like the shots of you holding the phone and like you're clearly talking to people and walking us through, like that ended up being, I think, some of the most impactful parts. And it wouldn't have been the same to be hearing his voiceover and watch like a professional shot following him through. I think it ended up working really well, that it was clearly you filming in the heat of the moment when you could. So. And
were any of your colleagues there, the EMT colleagues, able to see the film?
Yeah, actually, I just got it because Taylor posted it on her Facebook page. I just got a text from one of my friends saying it looks great and to let her know how terrific a job she did. So yeah.
Yeah.
And so tell me about right now. Are you still in school or have you graduated, and are you still working in the ambulance?
Yeah, so I'm still in school. I'm part-time this semester.
You ended up taking that semester incomplete.
Yeah, I kind of took an incomplete that semester once I had to you know, take on more of the training responsibilities. It became a lot to balance the full online course load and all of that. So I'm still finishing up my coursework. I took a leave of absence from the fire station because I am now working full time as well. Also in public safety, I'm working for the DC Police Department now. So that was kind of a fast transition. But I'm hoping to return to volunteering when I can.
Wonderful. Well, I love this story, and thank you for taking part in it. And I know it's a big ask to ask somebody to contribute their story and to allow it to become something public. And so I'm glad your relationship survived that. And you are still thriving. And okay, well, let me move to the next filmmaker, but I know we'll probably have some audience questions for you both. So let's move on to Emily. Emily Strime, hi. Great to see you. Are you on mute?
Not anymore.
There we go. Okay, excellent. Emily, okay, tell us about your film and tell us also about what was your original project and then how did you pivot to this, again, a very personal family-based film?
Sure. So my film was Virtual Love, and it was a collection of video diaries from about 20 different members of my family, recording their experiences throughout COVID and how we had to relearn how to deal with grief and, religious holidays and things like that. It is a 100% different story than what I was planning on. I had actually been working on the pre-production for at least a year. So, but I was working on a project that would follow a Jewish grandmother who owns a medical marijuana dispensary in Washington, D.C. And for obvious reasons with COVID, she went into self-quarantine pretty quickly because of her age, as did her husband, who also co-owns it. So production completely halted. And even still, she hasn't been back to work yet since.
Oh, wow.
Just because of safety reasons. So, yeah, so it was a big difference because I was not intending to have my face on the screen at all. And it switched to my face on the screen quite a bit more than I'm usually comfortable with. So I think it was hard. It was difficult because I asked so many people in my family to participate at maybe the most stressful time of this entire thing, when no one knows what's happening and everybody's freaking out and people are losing jobs and everything. And I just added something else to their plate. And they were wonderful in terms of participating and responding and being truthful in their videos. But it definitely was an interesting experience because there was only so much involvement I had with their part. So them filming themselves, I would give a prompt every day. But what they did with that prompt was up to them. And so whether they showed me their kids riding a skateboard or they just talked about their day or about the exercise they're doing, it made it so that I was also an observer and I was also a participant in it more. I obviously had to edit it together, but.
Well, and one of the things that I remember about the process of your film is that you really, I think one of the most ingenious parts of your film is the structure that you created out of all of these disparate parts of all of these dozens of videos that you were bringing in from your family members. You used yourself and your voice to create that glue. You used the family holiday as well as the tragic, passing of your uncle to make it about something more than just a family dealing with the pandemic. It was about a family dealing with grief and yet coming together around those things which bring us unity, right? And can you talk a little bit about that process of putting it together, creating the structure for the film?
Sure. I definitely went through a few structures before I landed on this one. And that is largely because 20 people have a lot to say. And I could have made 12 different movies about 12 different things if I had wanted to. And it was very unstable at first because I didn't know how to structure this at all, other than just getting people's stories and kind of going chronologically. And when my great uncle Dave passed away, that kind of gave us something to all be involved in together, even though we're all separate. Because up until then, we're all telling our separate stories. And having that happen gave me the opportunity to move it forward, to pull everybody, pull each individual video together to make it a cohesive thought. It was definitely difficult to narrow it down to focusing on that. And I ended up bringing in more of my religion than I would have thought I would have. And partially that is because of the timing. Passover happened to go on while we were producing this. So, our Zoom Passover was our way of coping. And it was, one of the first opportunities of our family to be back together again. after all of that had happened.
What was your family's response to the film? Did they see it? The people who were in it, at least?
Yeah. I mean, they always give a family response if it's great, you know. With getting feedback from 20 different people is difficult, because it's also difficult to ask specific questions. You know, but at the same, like, but everybody saw it, and I will readily admit I had complaints from one of my cousins, you know, and part of that is because of the limitations I had on being able to get feedback from everybody, and just having the time to do it as well, because all of this was pushed together so quickly.
Sure. Well, let me throw some questions out there to everyone. One question I was interested in asking is, you know, how is this collaborative approach to filmmaking and documentary filmmaking, how has it changed the way you're thinking about future films that you may want to make? I mean, all of you are active filmmakers and wanting to be in filmmaking as your career. And so I'm interested in how this experience kind of shaped the way you're thinking about future projects. So maybe I can just go through, I'll just call on you or raise your hand maybe if you would like to start. Fernando.
Yes, so I really enjoyed exploring the collaborative aspect of filmmaking. So much so that I created a grant proposal for a fiction film project that embraced this model. And it became the first fiction film to receive an AU Summer Artists and Scholars Grant. And it was based on the collaborative approach, but in fiction. And so, you know, we included community feedback in the story, the screenplay development. It's currently in post, so once there's a rough cut, that'll be reviewed by community members as well. And so I think this course was foundational in that it kind of showed me the possibilities of that.
I'm so excited to see that project when it's finished, Fernando. And you know, it deeply warmed my heart when I saw you taking the concepts and then integrating them into your narrative fiction work. And I know that you went to El Paso and you integrated community feedback, and you also used community members as the actors, right?
Yes. So the film takes place on the U.S.-Mexico border in El Paso, Juarez. And so we did a survey when we were in the script development phase, and we got 80 respondents from people who live either in both El Paso or Juarez, both one or the other, or used to and then moved. And so we were able to include things directly from that into the script. And yes, we were able to film with the family. COVID, you know, when COVID happened, we were like, how are we going to do this? But we worked it out, and we used a family that actually has experiences on both sides to model the film after.
Wonderful. Well, we can't wait to see it. Taylor, how about you? I know that you've been you're not even graduated yet, are you? But you're already starting your own freelance business. Tell me more.
Yeah, I graduated in May, and this film sort of unintentionally jump-started my documentary career. I'd never pieced together a narrative the way you do for documentary before this class. So I just finished making a 20-minute film with a nonprofit in Virginia about substance abuse disorder and the prevalence in Northern Virginia communities. And that film also happened to be very participatory, and neither of those things happened on purpose. But I had shots that I did professionally, and I did the interviews professionally, and then I had the people that were the subjects of the documentary taking shots themselves just on an iPhone, the way Henry did in more sensitive, like housing situations in medical and therapy environments where I wouldn't really be welcome and I wouldn't really be helpful. And it just worked out that it was much better and easier for them to take their own footage, and they were much more comfortable capturing like real moments of their day and like real group therapy sessions and like real bonding they were having in these housing situations that you can't really bring a professional film crew into. And I think that's what I've learned is it would have been really exciting to ride on the back of the ambulance and shoot, and it would have been really exciting to be in all these situations. And, you know, obviously I love the filmmaking aspect of it, but you just get to experience a lot more of like your participants' real emotions and real situations and experiences when you give them the freedom to capture what they want to without the pressures of, you know, a big camera and a mic and direction from someone. Like, you're really capturing what they want to be showcasing. And I think I wouldn't have done that if it wasn't this class. And that's something I definitely want to be doing outside of this class. In another film I have in pre-production right now, that's definitely something we're considering, is how can we make sure the participant is included in obviously the edit and the pre-production, but also just in capturing the footage. It's really impactful.
That's wonderful. Emily, do you have any thoughts? No pressure to answer, but if you want to, I want to give you an opportunity.
I think, I mean, I haven't had a specific project related to this. And I think it's a difficult one to continue because of the amount of responsibility it puts on other people, less so than my own responsibility. Having said that, you know, Taylor talked about working on a narrative arc within a documentary. And because my focus is on social and political impact stories, but I split it between documentary production and fiction film screenwriting, which is an odd combination. But they surprisingly influence each other. It's made it a lot easier for me to notice like the basic beats in a film that I need, no matter what, whether it's narrative or nonfiction. And, you know, I will admit, I learned a lot of what I don't want to do. You know, it wasn't my first choice to be doing this project. And I think it was a good experience to have my own face in there, to know what it feels like. So I know what it feels like to be somebody on the other side. But once I'm good with, and yeah, it mostly helped with my story writing, just because with it going so quickly, I didn't have the time to plot it out as much as I would have another film. And so this taught me to kind of think on my feet.
Well, let me move to some audience questions, and I may have actually combine a couple of them because one is, you know, are any of you thinking about continuing to document the COVID-19 pandemic and its impact after the class? But maybe connected to that, there's another question about what did you learn about yourself and filmmaking through these projects that you wouldn't have learned without the pandemic? So A, are you thinking about doing anything else related to COVID? And B, what did you learn that you wouldn't have learned otherwise? And just raise your hand if you have, you don't all have to answer each question if you don't want, but if you have a thought about it. Anybody planning to do anything else related to COVID? Yeah, Taylor?
Yeah, I'm in pre-production right now with another filmmaking friend on how COVID is impacting small businesses, and we're still totally working out the details, but I think this gave me a lot of confidence in how to piece together that narrative, and it taught me a lot about, you know, needing to know the themes before you go into it. We filmed like so much about your family and our relationship and more about equipment shortages, and I think I learned a lot the importance of like narrowing down your 2 or 3 threads that are going to piece the whole thing together. And now in pre-production, I'm thinking a lot more about those themes and how you want to carry those throughout. But yeah, I'm hoping to do a lot more about how COVID is impacting, you know, small businesses, and specifically small businesses I frequent, because obviously it was really horrific for first responders, but there's so many people in our community that are being impacted who aren't just healthcare workers and who aren't just, you know, law enforcement or first responders in that way. And so I think it's important to keep telling the stories of other people who are also losing things.
Great. Fernando, I want to, I know that you are very interested in working as a cinematographer in the future as a professional cinematographer. And I was wondering, how did having to pivot, mid-film when the pandemic hit, how did that impact your thinking about cinematography and how you approach a subject or shoot within those, within constraints?
Yes, that was a big thing because, as mentioned, I wanted to be with Yanit in a lot of moments. That was like the goal. That's the style I prefer. And losing that, having to use photos, having to find get creative with certain ways. I mean, it really shows you that the most important thing is story. Of course, I mean, even if I did have complete control and I were with Yanit, that should still be the priority, 100%. And capturing these moments, but you try to figure out, okay, how else can I show conflict? How else can I show that this is a turbulent moment for Yanit or for the emotional arc? And you figure out, okay, this photo is a little darker, or this bit of the shot that I was gonna discard actually works in this way. So it really forces you to think about every frame. What are you saying? What is this doing? And maximizing what each shot does.
There's a question in the chat I just see here that asks, what was it about Yanit that made you realize she was the person you wanted to follow for your film?
Yes, so Yanit, for anyone that's ever met or interacted with her, she's just such a strong and powerful. She has such a presence. I mean, on stage, this comes across very clearly. She's an amazing dancer that doesn't just focus on Mexican folkloric dance. She has other training as well. But I think there was something about Yanit's dedication. As I mentioned, her commute just to and from dance, just that alone. For me, the dance studio is actually in Tenleytown. It's close to AU. It was, like a 10-minute time commitment to get there. But for, you're talking about around the hour mark. And so I think, I was trying to capture that and show her presence, not both on the stage and off the stage and in the rehearsal room and in the classroom. And that was one of the regrets that I didn't get to film. I mean, I'm not sure if even without the virus I would have been able to film in a hospital. But trying to work around that.
Emily, did you have any thoughts about that question? More that you learned through the pandemic?
So not so much more that I learned, but just going back to the question that Taylor had answered. It was, in terms of continuing on with the pandemic, I don't intend to continue on with this particular story. I had mentioned the reasons why earlier. But when I eventually do go back to the production of Marijuana as a Mitzvah, I am pretty much assuming that COVID is going to be a part of it. Even when, post-vaccine, and if things start getting back to normal, I think it has to be a part of it because it's a focus on medical marijuana. And the woman it is about, Stephanie Kahn, is a former nurse. She worked as a nurse for about 25 years in various areas of medicine before she started this dispensary. So I think COVID really affected this industry, and it became one of the essential, an essential worker, an essential place to go, which people were afraid of because they weren't sure that was going to happen because there was no legal responsibility for them to keep it open. So I think it's going to be a part of that story in some capacity. And I also am kind of using the experience of this and my need to turn it around into something that makes me laugh, makes me smile, and, in so much despair. And so it's pushed me towards writing a new feature film script, which focuses on the need for power and how it outweighs the responsibility of power, and is supposed to be a not so direct commentary on how our administration has dealt with the coronavirus.
Yeah, Emily is taking on a really exciting and ambitious feature script for her thesis. So Emily is in our MFA program, and you're tackling satire, which my hat's off to you, because that sounds hard. But I love that the base of this idea for this satirical feature narrative has to do with the politicization of basically healthcare, right? And so in that way, I hadn't even thought about that yes, your documentary had to do with the pandemic, but now you're tackling it on a very kind of high level creative narrative approach with your satire. So I'm very excited about that project. Okay, let me look at the chat box here. Make sure I'm getting all these questions. How did the lab or the class adjust all of this for you, and how much pressure was there to finish to complete the class? Did you all feel some serious pressure from your mean professor to finish your films? What was that pressure like? Because I know that we would come together every week, and it was almost like half class, half therapy session. And thankfully, we had a small class, which made it intimate, right? And we really got to know everyone. But what was that like? Because most people's brains just like stopped functioning those first few months of the pandemic. And so what was it like trying to finish really a major creative project along with all of your other classes in that kind of constraint or the pressure of that time frame? Taylor.
I think we talked a lot about how the class ended, obviously, before Henry stopped working as an EMT. So when I had to finish the film and turn it in, you were still working, you were still training people, you were still riding the ambulance. So I found it particularly hard to find sort of a conclusion to the film when the experience we were documenting wasn't over. And I think that was the hardest pressure, is deciding, because you don't want to leave a story with completely loose ends. So it was figuring out, how am I going to wrap this up and be clear that, we don't really know what's going to happen. We don't really know how many more people are going to need to go out. We don't know if we're going to get sick. We don't know if he's going to have every day or work less. So it's definitely pressure in that way, trying to, put a deadline on it and wrap it up nicely. It wasn't totally over, but I think, we learned a lot about, again, like how to tell the right theme to where, it left you on a good note, but you were showcasing enough experiences to get that theme and like our emotions across.
Anyone else? Fernando?
So I would say that the hardest part related to this question, what existed even without COVID. The hardest part, I think, is figuring out where can I find a beginning, middle, and end in the story, how to explore that, and get it done within a semester's timeline. And so, sometimes you can't. Sometimes some stories you're like, this is going to take me 3 years, and gonna have to find the funding for that somehow. But that I think is the biggest challenge, is trying to figure out, okay, someone's life and someone's story is so big, how to find those hyper specific moments that really bring it to life, and those seemingly mundane moments that make it real.
You all sound like such good storytellers. This is why I love film school, because anybody can learn the camera. You can watch some YouTube videos to learn tech, right? But really, what you all have been on a journey on, I think, over the past few years of your education, is that the thing you're describing, the ability to structure and to find the story from when you're dealing with real life, right? And most people's lives do not have a clear beginning, middle, and end within a 4-month period, right? And so it is your job as a filmmaker to find those greater themes and to find those stakes building points in somebody's story, and to find a conclusion to that story so that your viewer has satisfying experience, and that you're also at the same time remaining true to the story that you're telling. And that's the art, right? Within especially documentary film, is to you're obviously manipulating reality because you're working in the edit with these just bits of reality you've captured on camera. But you have this job to really synthesize it and remain true to the spirit of the story while also giving your viewer a complete experience. And all of you did a fantastic job with that in the middle of a pandemic in which people were just struggling to take out your trash at night. You know, it was so stressful. And so for you all to be creative and to be vulnerable, especially with your friends and family, to produce these films, I just think you all did a phenomenal job. Okay, let me see this chat over here and make sure I'm still on time. Okay, I think we have time for about one more question. Oh, this is a good one. For Virtual Love, after you had to put your initial project aside, was it difficult to get excited about a new idea? And did your final idea come to you easily?
It was incredibly difficult to get excited about a new idea. Because that project had been building up for so long. I had been looking forward to that semester. I was finally going to be able to do it. And then it, my feet were taken out from under me. So it was very difficult to get excited about a new idea. And I don't think I came to the final idea until like the last week of editing. I had my ideas, and it came a little bit easier, unfortunately, with a tragedy. But I still had a lot of trouble forming the story for quite a while. And large part because of the amount of information I was getting, like Laura was just saying, but also it was, I had to psych myself up in order to not only be invested in this film, but to be emotional myself on camera, as I was asking other people to do it. So it was definitely difficult. I've since gotten to the point where I'm proud of it and support it, but it definitely took a little bit. It took a little like kicking my own butt.
Well, let me see. I missed one question here, which I think is for everyone. We can conclude with this one. How has this experience influenced how you think about narrative distance? And in other words, what ways did your proximity to the subjects and subject matter present challenges, and how did it make the content richer? I like this idea of contemplating narrative distance. In what ways did your closeness to your subjects present challenges, but also make the content richer?
Well, I think for my film, it was all about the distance that we had between us, because I was not near anybody. Whereas a lot of my family members, in fact, I think most of my family members at least lived with another person close to them, or several children. So the distance definitely made a difference. And especially, we had a Passover Seder on Zoom, which is not something we would ever have done. And it's not necessarily that family would have gathered for Passover in a non-COVID year, but it made it more important to us to be together in some capacity. And I think, proximity to my subjects, that was the biggest challenge I had, was trying to be respectful of all my family members and maintaining my own relationships with them, and not knowing when to stop digging and knowing how to navigate the fact that you have to kind of explain that you have 30 hours of footage and are making an 8-minute film. And so there's so much that was good. There's so much heartfelt storytelling by my family members that isn't in this film because of how much I had to narrow it down. So that was definitely one of the biggest challenges, was trying to narrow it down without offending anybody, I guess. But also so that it was equally representative.
Anyone else have any reflections on that. Yes, Fernando.
I think, on the subject of the distance between the subject and, the creator, I mean, I think that's the whole point of the community documentary course, is how to navigate that relationship, regardless of your distance. If you're a complete outsider to, if I think like me or some of the other films is, you're very close, but still, breaking down your privilege, trying to break through your privilege. And, this is such a special course, especially at American University, because AU has a, complicated relationship to DC. Like a lot of the gentrification in DC comes from AU and the other universities, and trying to, reconcile and work through that is very important, especially in a storytelling setting like our courses, like the Film and Media Arts program is, trying to figure out, okay, how do you take a group of very privileged American University students in a very diverse city, and, make films in a way that tries to challenge that and break those barriers.
Mm. Oh, thank you, Fernando, for making that point. Beautifully said. Any final thoughts, Taylor?
Yeah, I mean, I think it, in some ways, was a benefit that we knew each other so well, because I don't think you'd have been that expressive or emotional with a stranger filming. I think like we were able to have real conversations where you're expressing real feelings that maybe you wouldn't have said if it was a reporter instead of like the person you're living with. But yeah, I mean, it was hard. It was hard to have you going through like one of the hardest things you'd been through and our relationship had been through, and be like, oh, by the way, could you pull out a camera while you're experiencing your exhaustion and emotional trauma and let me record it? And I think like for all of us, especially in that participatory way, it was hard knowing he was at a shift and saving lives, and texting him and being like, hey, could you try to get that shot of you walking through the ambulance? And like, I really need that footage of you walking and driving. Like, that would be great. So it was complicated, but I think it helped that we knew each other so well. And I think it made the narrative helpful, and we weren't too upset. So it worked out.
Well, I'm just going to read a couple of encouraging comments here from Anna. Such inspiring stories when they're needed the most. Thank you all. And then from Becca, amazing films. Each story is so powerful. So I agree. Proud of all of you. I'm so glad you could all be with us today. And just to let everybody know who's watching this, a recording of the Q&A is going to be available on the Docs in Progress YouTube channel later today. And the Community Stories Festival runs through Sunday. So please make sure to check out the rest of the films that are being offered. And we just thank you all for spending your Saturday with us. And thank you to the filmmakers. So thanks, everybody, and have a great rest of your day.